Now that we have an initial bind on the character, we want to go over some weight painting techniques to refine our weights. So while we don't need an insane amount of weighting on this part of the project, we do want to go over some fundamentals on what's going on here. So our first thing is to paint weights, we need to select on our geometry, then go into skin, and there's an area that says paint skin weights, and we can go into the options, and this brings up our tool set here. I don't need that. Okay. Cool. Another way we can get into the weight mapping is that if I hold down right mouse on any part of the geometry, not a joint, we can slide up and say paint skin weights. We need to know how to do both of those because sometimes that the mouse gesture does not actually go into the paint weights. It kind of goes wonky. Now we got our heat mapping. We got weight mapping. I'm saying the heat mapping. I can change what I'm influencing by going through our hierarchy right here. And you can see we see the maps kind of going up like that. I can also change influences by hovering over a map by a joint, holding down right click, and then sliding up. This again has some buggy features, so you need to know how to do both of these. Okay, and I can jump around. Problem with this is that it's sometimes hard to see the joint. If you're a little off, it won't actually, of course, I was on a joint, it won't give you our mode. So that can be kind of frustrating, especially when you're jumping back and forth. Okay, so now I want to talk about this vert. This guy right here, I don't think of him as just a vertex. I think of him as like a piece of geometry that's parented to a joint because he's an influence. And he can be influenced by, let's say, this joint here. And I rotate this joint around by like 30 degrees. This influence will rotate around 30 degrees if he's completely weighted to this joint. Or like if I parented a geometry to a joint, that's what it would happen. Now what smooth weighting allows us to do is distribute this weighting between multiple joints. So I can say 50% is here, so it only moves half when it rotates it. And then I could put 50% on this one so that it moves half when this one moves up. So they kind of pull and tug away from each other. Now the challenging thing on this is that you have to have 100% or 1 influence at all times. If you reduce influence weight, like you say you give the guy 80% influence overall, that 20% is going to be redivvied up between the other joints. This is letting Maya choose where these weightings are going, and you know when Maya chooses something for you, it doesn't always work out very well. So that's going to be our trick, and when we're in our paint weights, we're actually adjusting that. So I'm going to select away, and I'm going to go into my paint skin weights. And you can see now our influence is here. What this is doing is the color is telling us what our influence is. So white, the closer to stark white is the closer it is to 1. The closer to stark black is the closer it is to black on here. Okay, so that being said, we're going to go into some weighting, and it's going to bring us down to this menu. We're going to have a couple of settings. We're going to have replace, we're going to have add, and we're going to have smooth. Now, we're always going to be telling how much influence we're going to put on it. So if I'm going to replace and I'm at a value of 1, it means every time I hit my brush, especially in the full opaque brush, it's going to say 1, 1, 1, 1. So it's pretty much going to redefine all the weights on here. Let me show you that. So I'm going to move one of my joints so I can see the influence kind of go crazy like that. I'm going to go into my skin weights tool. I'm going to go into that influence, holding right click and sliding up. And then I'm going to just paint, and you'll see, it just starts going back. Like that. Okay. So this looks pretty stark on here, and it is. But these guys shouldn't be influenced by anything other than the forearm. It's not until we get to closer to the wrist is that we got to start being more subtle with our weighting. Okay. Like that. Okay. So I mentioned some subtlety in weighting. Now I have my add. Add in this point is going to do exactly the same thing as replace because it's replacing the 1. But if I do the 0.1, that means that every time I click, it's going to be 10%. And the difference between these brushes here is that this is completely everything I move my painting tool over, it's going to be 100. It's going to be 10% in this case. This guy at the dead middle is going to be 10% and pretty much like 20 or 30% out from the middle, and then it tapers off. So at the ends, it's actually getting close to 0 instead of 0.1, and this guy's only the dead center is 0.1. In this case, I'm going to stay at the full opaque brush, and in this pass, that's all I'm going to be on. So I can just paint, 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 paint like that. Okay. Again, it's important to have an objective that you're going for. I just want to have this stuff moving with it. Now I mean, this is almost enough for our test pass, but I want to bring these vertices back so it's more even between the two of them. And the reason why they're so forward is because they're all under the wrist's influence. So if I paint here, you're going to see them come back because the elbow is not moved. See? I can go underneath and do that too. Okay, now it's getting kind of chunky here, which again, on this pass, completely fine. But if I was being OCD and I wanted to actually make this read, maybe I wanted to do this for more of a pose bind on it. How would I clean that up? Well, that's when we get the smooth option. The smooth option averages it out. Now, in 2015, they kind of messed up this tool because it likes to spit weights all over the place. But for this part of the project, we'll be fine. We'll talk about that in a later time when our focus is just on binding. What we want to try to prevent with this tool is to paint an area that's completely white or completely black because it doesn't know what it's supposed to average between. And that's when it really spits weight around. Okay, so that's completely fine. You do want to move your influence around back and forth to make sure, A, it didn't shoot something else off where it shouldn't be, or you didn't accidentally weight. Now again, my OCD nature on it, when I move my arm up and down, you can see how these verts are kind of wiggling back and forth. If this was a final pass on weighting, I would not be acceptable. But this isn't. This is just a test bind, and I could definitely tell that that joint is moving everything around it the way it should be. All those vertices are rotating around that point. I'm happy with that position. This pass is supposed to be really quick to get the idea of where your joints are. It's not to be a final version. It just is tempting to finish off everything. It's more likely I'm going to remove this whole weighting pass when I get to my final weight pass. So don't spend insane amount of time on this. Okay, so I want to show another version. I'm going to bring up the hierarchy map, or the weighting that was done with the hierarchy initial weighting, and it's going to do some crazy things. Now the arm on this case is actually fine, but you'll see that the shoulder is kind of jacked up, and of course the ears are attacking the body. This stuff for the initial bind, I could see everything's moving around. I'm fine with that. But those guys on the head and the ears need to go through. Also, the jaw got all messed up. Now this thing, you're like, oh my god, that's a lot of stuff. It's actually not that bad. If I move this down like that, and I can do it this side too. This will be a quick one. I can go on my paint skin weights. Actually, before I do that, I want to select the verts here. I want to go into vertexes, select both of these guys. And now I'm going to go to the weight maps. We want to make sure that those vertexes are still selected. Okay? And they are. I want to go into my head influence because this is where I want to paint my weights. Now instead of just adding to make those move back, which is going to be a pain in the butt here, I want to just flood these over here. Now the important thing is that on here I do have these vertices selected, so these are the only things that are going to be weighted. So now with that influence selected, the full opaque brush, and now I'm going to go into replace. I said flood. Oh, it did not go there. Oh, I'm at 10%. There we go. Boom. Same thing for under the jaw. Now here's a technique for the jaw. For one, I can paint a lot of this. But a quick process here is going to vertex, go to the bottom of our area like here, select one here, and select one here. Hold down Shift and do greater than on your keyboard, and you can see how it grows that selection. All that stuff should be a part of it. I could probably go another level on here too. Okay, then I go on my weight map. Sometimes though, luckily this did work out. Sometimes it does not actually keep the selected ones on here. It focuses away, so make sure they're still selected. I flood, and I go from there, and I still got some more on here. I can actually probably just select the verts on these. Actually, in this case, I could probably just paint them off. See, this is where well, it actually did work out pretty good. Sometimes the little spokes at the end can be hard to select, hard to paint. Like these guys are going to be, of course, made a liar out of me. Those guys can be a serious pain in the butt. I could just paint these guys. And again, if I'm being really, really obsessive on this, I'm going to go through. I can go into add. I can go into 0.1 on my value. Make sure you don't touch opacity. Sometimes that guy gets clicked in it. It just fades out how much weighting you're doing. This is normally not what you want. And I can go in here and I can just add like that. Okay. I'm starting to mess it up, so I'm gonna hit smooth. See? It cleans up. Now I am checking for spiked vertices. Those guys should not be there. I do have controls in this pass, which, like I said, they do not have to be in there. But see, it's okay. It looks like our vertices on our ears are still not quite right. So let's go and select those guys again. Paint weights. Flood. There you go. I guess it's just the type of geometry is. Okay. So there you go. There is one more thing that I want to talk about, is that our wrist, in this case, if I go to the heat map, I did not save my weighting on that. If I move this down, I want this side over here to be the same weighting as it. So let me do this again real quick. I'll go into the influence here. I'm going to add 100%, because adding is the same thing as replacing at 100%. Okay, I'm almost there. Go to 0.1. Okay. I could do some smoothing again. Okay. So let's say it's fine. I'm going to zero this out, and I want to mirror it on the other side. Because right now, I'd have to paint it on the other side, and I don't want to have to do that. So our final step is actually mirroring geometry from weighting on one side to the other side. So I make sure everything is in its default pose. If not, this will break. I select my geometry, I go to skin, and there's an area on here that says mirror skin weights, and I go into the options for this. So I go YZ, because I want to take from the positive X to the negative X, and hit apply. Boom. See? Boom. There you go. So there's some refinement weighting techniques just to get your testBind going and get a good general idea of where your joints placement is, if it's good or bad, or if you need to do some adjustments.